Comment where you're watching from today. This story of mistaken identity will leave you speechless. In the heart of Columbus, Ohio, where old money mingles with new ambitions, a chance encounter was about to unfold that would leave the city's social circles buzzing for months to come. It was a warm spring afternoon at the prestigious Franklin Park Conservatory, where the annual Botanical Society fundraiser had drawn Columbus's most influential figures. The glass-domed conservatory sparkled like a jewel, its Victorian architecture a testament to the city's rich history, while meticulously manicured gardens provided a stunning backdrop for the social elite's latest gathering. Among the perfectly coiffed heads and designer outfits, one woman moved with quiet grace and purpose. Usha Vance, with her elegant yet understated appearance, navigated through the crowd with the kind of confidence that comes from genuine accomplishment rather than inherited privilege. Her simple, well-tailored dress spoke of refined taste rather than flashy ostentation, and her warm smile reached her eyes in a way that designer Botox never could. The event was in full swing, with champagne flowing freely and conversation buzzing about the latest social scandals and charity initiatives. The air was thick with the perfume of exotic flowers and even more exotic perfumes, as Columbus's wealthy patrons gathered to supposedly support the arts while really supporting their own social standings. It was the kind of event where names were dropped like loose change and connections were currency more valuable than the dollars being pledged to various causes. Victoria Wellington Pierce, a third-generation socialite whose family name adorned several buildings in the city, held court near the orchid display, her voice carefully modulated to carry just far enough to reach her intended audience, cut through the ambient chatter like a diamond through glass. "Of course, darling. We simply must discuss the new wing at the museum. The board is practically begging for my input on the architectural details." As Usha approached the refreshment table near Victoria's social circle, she reached for a glass of water, her mind focused on the educational initiative she hoped to discuss with some of the potential donors present. Victoria's gaze fell upon her with the casual dismissiveness that only generations of inherited wealth can perfect. "Oh dear," Victoria called out, her voice dripping with false concern. "The help really should use the service entrance, though I must say the catering staff is usually better dressed." She paused, letting her words hang in the air like poison ivy, waiting to see who among her circle would laugh first. Usha turned slowly, her expression composed but resolute. Years of navigating complex situations as both a mother and a professional had taught her that dignity need not raise its voice to be heard. But before she could speak, Victoria continued her performance. "I mean, really, who let you in through the main entrance? I simply must speak to the event coordinator about maintaining certain standards." Victoria's perfectly manicured hand waved dismissively in Usha's direction, her diamond bracelet catching the light from the conservatory's glass ceiling. The small crowd around Victoria shifted uncomfortably, some sensing that something was amiss, others too caught up in their own social positioning to notice the quiet strength in Usha's bearing. A few of the younger socialites tittered nervously, following Victoria's lead like well-trained sheep. "Mrs. Wellington Pierce," Usha began, her voice clear and steady, carrying the weight of someone who had earned her place in the world rather than inherited it. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Victoria cut her off with a laugh that sounded like breaking crystal. "Oh, honey, there's no misunderstanding. I know service staff when I see them. Now, be a dear and fetch me a fresh glass of champagne. The good stuff, mind you, not the cheaper vintage they're serving to the general attendees." The air in the conservatory seemed to still, as if the exotic plants themselves were holding their breath. A few more guests had turned to watch the exchange, drawn by the unmistakable tension that now perfumed the air more heavily than any flower could. What Victoria didn't notice was the subtle shift in the room's dynamics. Several of the events, organizers had begun moving toward them, their faces a mixture of horror and embarrassment. The museum's director, Dr. Harrison, was already making his way through the crowd, his bow tie slightly askew in his haste. "Mrs. Wellington Pierce," Dr. Harrison's voice cut through the tension like a well-honed blade. "I see you've met Mrs. Vance, though perhaps you haven't been properly introduced." He turned to Usha with a warm smile that carried genuine respect. "Mrs. Vance, I cannot tell you how honored we are to have you here today. Your work with educational initiatives across Ohio has been nothing short of revolutionary." Victoria's perfectly arranged features began to slip like a mask losing its moorings. Her eyes darted between Dr. Harrison and Usha, the gears of social calculation spinning frantically behind her carefully crafted facade. "Usha Vance," Dr. Harrison continued, seeming to savor each word, "is not only a Yale Law School graduate and accomplished professional, but also serves on multiple educational boards across the state. She's one of our most distinguished guests. In today, and her husband, as you might know, is Senator J.D. Vance." Usha completed the sentence quietly, her voice carrying no trace of triumph or malice. "Though I prefer to let my own work speak for itself." The color drained from Victoria's face faster than champagne from a tipped glass. Around them, the crowd had grown larger, and whispers began to ripple through the conservatory like waves. In a suddenly disturbed pond, several phones had appeared in hands, their owners no doubt already composing texts that would spread through Columbus's social circles at the speed of schadenfreude. Victoria's mouth opened and closed several times, like a coy fish suddenly finding itself out of water. Her carefully constructed world of social hierarchies and assumed superiority had just cracked like thin ice beneath unwary feet. The women who had been laughing with her moments before had already begun to drift away, as if proximity to such a faux pas might be socially contagious. But Usha, drawing from a well of grace deeper than any conservatory fountain, simply smiled. "No apology necessary, Mrs. Wellington Pierce. These events can be quite overwhelming, can't they? Perhaps we could start fresh and discuss the new educational initiative for underprivileged children in Columbus. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we might make a real difference in our community." The lesson hung in the air like the mist that nourished the conservatory's rarest blooms. True class cannot be inherited, bought, or faked. It grows from the seeds of character, watered by grace, and blooms in moments of challenge. Have you ever been underestimated or judged unfairly? Share your story in the comments below. Remember, it's not about proving others wrong. It's about staying true to who you are. The aftermath of Victoria Wellington Pierce's social blunder rippled through Columbus's high society like a stone thrown into a pristine pond. Within hours, phones buzzed with notifications as the story spread through private group chats and social circles. The Franklin Park Conservatory event, meant to be another routine gathering of the city's elite, had transformed into something far more meaningful. A moment that would challenge the very foundations of their social hierarchy. As the evening proceeded, the dynamics in the conservatory had shifted dramatically. Where Victoria had once commanded attention like a queen holding court, she now found herself in an increasingly empty orbit. The same people who had laughed at her jokes earlier were now gravitating toward Usha Vance, drawn not by her title or status, but by the quiet dignity with which she had handled the confrontation. Dr. Harrison, the museum's director, had smoothly integrated Usha into conversations with the conservatory's most influential donors. Her passionate discussion of educational initiatives for underprivileged children in Ohio resonated with an authenticity that made Victoria's earlier social posturing seem hollow and outdated. Several board members who had previously been hesitant about committing to new community programs were now leaning in, captivated by Usha's vision of a more inclusive Columbus. Victoria, meanwhile, had retreated to a quiet corner near the butterfly garden, her designer heels clicking nervously against the marble floor as she thumbed through her phone. Her social media feeds were already filling with oblique references to the incident. "Some people confuse inheritance with importance," read one. "Post. True class can't be bought," declared another. Each new notification felt like another crack in her carefully constructed facade. But what truly unsettled Victoria wasn't the immediate social fallout. She had weathered scandals before. It was the way Usha's response had exposed the emptiness of her own carefully curated world. Where Victoria had spent decades building walls of exclusivity, Usha had demonstrated the power of building bridges. The contrast was stark and unavoidable. As the evening wore on, more details about Usha's background began circulating among the guests. Stories of her journey from a humble background to Yale Law School, her dedication to public service, and her commitment to maintaining her identity while navigating the highest levels of society painted a picture that made Victoria's assumptions seem not just rude but profoundly out of touch. Margaret Whitmore, one of the conservatory's longest-standing patrons, approached Victoria with the kind of smile that could freeze champagne. "My dear," she said, her voice carrying decades of social warfare experience, "I do hope you're not planning to leave early. Mrs. Vance is about to speak about her latest initiative. We wouldn't want anyone to think you're uncomfortable." Victoria straightened her spine, years of social training kicking in automatically. "Of course not, Margaret. I was just freshening up." The lie felt stale on her tongue, but it was all she had left. Near the main podium, Usha was preparing to address the gathering. The crowd had grown larger than usual for these events, with even the staff finding excuses to linger nearby. There was something magnetic about her presence, a genuine warmth that made everyone feel seen and valued. "When I first came to Ohio," Usha began, her voice clear and confident, "I encountered many assumptions about who I was and where I belonged, but what I discovered was a community with the potential for extraordinary growth and inclusion." Her eyes met Victoria's briefly across the room, not with triumph or anger, but with an invitation to understand. "Our children's future isn't shaped by the labels we put on each other," she continued, "but by the opportunities we create together. Every child, regardless of their background, deserves the chance to dream big and work toward those dreams." The silence in the conservatory was complete, broken only by the gentle sound of water from the fountain. Even the most jaded socialites found themselves nodding, perhaps recognizing for the first time the difference between influence and impact. Victoria watched as several of her longtime social allies approached Usha after the speech, checkbooks already in hand. These were people who had previously dismissed community initiatives as charity cases, now eagerly joining a vision of genuine change. In a quiet moment between conversations, Usha made her way to Victoria's corner. The socialite stiffened, preparing for the public humiliation she felt she deserved. Instead, Usha offered her a genuine smile. "Mrs. Wellington Pierce," she said warmly, "I believe your family has been involved with educational initiatives in Columbus for generations. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we might combine traditional approaches with new ideas to reach more children in need." The gesture was more than just social grace. It was a masterclass in true leadership. Usha wasn't interested in winning a social skirmish. She was focused on building a stronger community, even if that meant extending a hand to someone who had tried to diminish her. Victoria found herself responding despite her embarrassment, sharing insights about her grandmother's work with local schools that she hadn't thought about in years. For the first time in recent memory, she was engaged in a conversation that wasn't about maintaining her social position, but about making a real difference. As the evening drew to a close, the contrast between old money and new vision had never been clearer. Victoria's carefully maintained world of social hierarchies and exclusive circles suddenly seemed like a relic of the past, while Usha's inclusive approach pointed toward a more dynamic and meaningful future. The story of that evening would be retold many times in Columbus's social circles, but not just as a cautionary tale about mistaken identity. It became a turning point, a moment when the old guard began to recognize that true influence comes not from excluding others, but from lifting them up. Later that night, as the last guests were leaving, one of the younger event staff members was overheard saying, "That's what real power looks like, not having to prove anything to anyone." The Franklin Park Conservatory, with its blend of preserved history and cultivated growth, had provided the perfect backdrop for this lesson in evolution. Just as the carefully tended gardens demonstrated that growth requires both strong roots and the ability to adapt, the evening had shown that true social progress comes from bridging divides rather than maintaining them. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone's grace under fire completely changed the dynamic of a situation? Share your experiences in the comments below. Remember, sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice is to rise above it and show a better way forward. The following days in Columbus's social circles buzzed with an energy that went far beyond typical society gossip. The incident at the Franklin Park Conservatory had struck a chord that resonated through the city's elite circles, forcing many to confront uncomfortable truths about their own assumptions and behaviors. But more importantly, it had sparked a conversation about what true leadership and influence really meant in modern society. Local social media exploded with activity as different versions of the story circulated. Some accounts painted Victoria Wellington Pierce as a villain, while others praised Usha Vance's graceful handling of the situation. But the most interesting discussions weren't about the confrontation itself. They were about the changing face of power and influence in contemporary society. The Monday following the event, Victoria sat in her perfectly appointed breakfast room, staring at her phone. Her social calendar, usually packed with exclusive luncheons and charity committee meetings, showed several conspicuous cancellations. The message was clear. The old rules of social engagement were changing, and she had failed to keep up. Meanwhile, Usha's schedule had become even busier, but not with social engagements. Educational leaders from across Ohio were reaching out, inspired by her speech at the conservatory. The incident had unexpectedly amplified her message about educational access and community building, turning a moment of potential conflict into a catalyst for positive change. At the prestigious Columbus Club, where the city's old money had gathered for generations, the lunch conversation turned repeatedly to the conservatory event. Margaret Whitmore, holding court at her usual table, offered her perspective to an attentive audience. "You know," she mused, stirring her tea with deliberate precision, "I remember when Victoria's grandmother, the original Mrs. Wellington Pierce, used to chair our education committee. She understood something that many of us have forgotten. Influence isn't about keeping people out, it's about lifting people up." The comments spread through the club faster than the fresh gossip about Victoria's latest social media faux pas, an ill-advised post attempting to justify her behavior that she'd quickly deleted. The older generation of Columbus society began, sharing stories about a time when their influence had been more closely tied to community impact than social exclusivity. Across town, in a significantly different setting, Usha was meeting with a group of community leaders at a local public school. The discussion focused on practical ways to implement the educational initiatives she'd spoken about at the conservatory. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very incident that had been meant to exclude her had actually created a broader platform for her message. Sometimes Usha told the gathered educators. Our biggest challenges become our greatest opportunities for change. What happened at the conservatory isn't about one person's mistake. It's about our community's potential to grow beyond old limitations. The local press, initially drawn to the story's social drama, found themselves covering a much more compelling narrative. The Columbus Dispatch ran a feature article titled "Beyond Status: Redefining Influence in Modern Columbus," which used the conservatory incident as a launching point for a deeper discussion about social change and community leadership. Victoria, for her part, was experiencing something entirely new: the need to reinvent herself. Her daughter, Caroline, a recent college graduate with modern sensibilities, had finally broken through her mother's defensive walls. "Mom," Caroline said, during an unexpected visit home, "this isn't just about one embarrassing moment. This is an opportunity to be part of something meaningful. Remember all those stories you used to tell me about great-grandmother's work with local schools? Maybe it's time to return to those roots." The conversation struck a chord that Victoria couldn't ignore. Sitting in her study later that evening, surrounded by photographs of 3 generations of Wellington Pierces at various charity galas and social events, she began to see her family legacy in a different light. The true power of her family name had never been about exclusivity. It had been about community impact. In an unexpected turn of events, Victoria reached out to Usha through proper channels, requesting a private meeting. The two women met at a quiet cafe, away from the prying eyes of society photographers and gossip columnists. The conversation that followed would later be described by both women as transformative. "Mrs. Vance," Victoria began, her usual polish temporarily set aside for genuine humility, "I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you my gratitude. You've helped me see something I've been blind to for far too long." Usha's response was characteristic of her approach to leadership. Sometimes it takes a moment of discomfort to open our eyes to new possibilities. "I believe your family's legacy of educational support could play a crucial role in what we're trying to achieve." The meeting lasted for hours, moving beyond apologies into substantive discussion about combining the Wellington Pierce family's historical influence with modern approaches to educational access. By the end, a surprising partnership had begun to take shape. The story could have ended there, a tale of personal growth and reconciliation. But its impact continued to ripple through Columbus society in unexpected ways. Other prominent families began revisiting their own approaches to community engagement. The social calendar began to shift, with more events focused on actual community impact rather than mere social display. At the next major fundraising event, held at the Columbus Museum of Art, the change was palpable. The usual social jockeying for position had been replaced by genuine discussions about community initiatives. Victoria and Usha were seen working together, presenting a united front for educational reform that combined traditional influence with modern vision. The local society pages, which had once focused exclusively on who wore what and who sat where, began featuring stories about actual impact and community change. The measure of social success was shifting from exclusivity to influence for good. Even the younger generation of Columbus society took notice. Caroline Wellington Pierce and her friends began organizing their own events, focused on bridging social divides rather than maintaining them. The incident at the conservatory had become a catalyst for generational change. Usha's approach to the entire situation became a case study in modern leadership. She had transformed a moment of potential conflict into an opportunity for community growth, demonstrating that true influence comes not from asserting superiority, but from creating opportunities for others to rise. The story reached beyond Columbus, picked up by national media as an example of how traditional social structures were evolving in modern America. But more importantly, it was changing lives on the ground, creating new pathways for collaboration between different segments of society. As spring turned to summer in Columbus, the Franklin Park Conservatory hosted another event. This time, a joint initiative between Usha's educational program and the Wellington Pierce Family Foundation. The guest list included people from all walks of life, gathered not for social prestige, but for genuine community impact. Victoria, standing beside Usha during the event, reflected aloud, "My grandmother always said that true legacy isn't about maintaining status, it's about making a difference. I finally understand what she meant. Have you ever seen a negative experience transform into an opportunity for positive change? Share your stories of unexpected growth and transformation in the comments below. Sometimes our greatest mistakes can lead to our most important lessons." 1 year after the incident that shook Columbus's social foundations, the Franklin Park Conservatory was once again hosting a major event. But this time, everything was different. The annual Education Access Gala, jointly organized by Usha Vance's initiative and the Wellington Pierce Family Foundation, had become the most anticipated event on the social calendar, not for its exclusivity, but for its impact. The glass-domed conservatory, bathed in the warm light of a setting sun, now served as a symbol of transparency and growth. The same space that had witnessed Victoria Wellington Pierce's infamous faux pas had become a crucible for social transformation in Columbus. The guest list for this evening's event told its own story, a seamless blend of old money and new vision, of traditional influence and modern innovation. Usha Vance stood near the entrance, greeting guests with the same warm authenticity that had turned a moment of confrontation into a catalyst for change. Her simple yet elegant attire spoke of confidence that needed no external validation. Beside her, Victoria Wellington Pierce had undergone her own transformation. Gone was the defensive arrogance of old money. In its place was a genuine engagement with the community she had once held at arm's length. "Can you believe it's been a year?" Victoria mused between greeting guests. "Sometimes I think about that evening and hardly recognize the person I was." Her words carried no self-pity, only the clear-eyed recognition of someone who had chosen to grow rather than retreat. The evening's program was a testament to what could be achieved when different worlds truly collaborated. The Wellington Pierce Family Foundation had opened its extensive network and resources to support Usha's educational initiatives, creating a bridge between traditional philanthropy and modern community engagement. The results were remarkable. Over the past year, their joint efforts had provided educational opportunities to thousands of underprivileged children across Ohio. Margaret Whitmore, the Grand Dame of Columbus society, observed the proceedings with satisfaction. "You know," she commented to a group of younger socialites, "this is what real influence looks like, not just writing checks, but actually changing lives." The younger women nodded, their own social media feeds now filled with community service projects rather than just charity galas. The transformation hadn't been limited to Columbus's social circles. Local businesses, inspired by the partnership between Usha and Victoria, had begun rethinking their approaches to community engagement. The old model of corporate philanthropy, annual donations and photo opportunities, had given way to sustained, meaningful involvement in community development. Dr. Harrison, the museum director who had witnessed the original confrontation, took the podium to share some remarkable statistics. The joint initiative had not only exceeded its educational goals, but had created a new model for social impact that was being studied by other cities. "What we're seeing here," he announced, "is not just charity, it's real, sustainable change." As he spoke, screens around the conservatory displayed images of the initiative's impact, new educational programs, mentorship opportunities, and community centers that had sprung up across the state. But more striking than the physical achievements were the stories of individual lives transformed. One video featured a young girl from East Columbus speaking confidently about her dreams of becoming a scientist. "Before this program," she said, "I didn't even know what was possible. Now I know that with education and support, I can achieve anything." The camera panned to show her working in a state-of-the-art lab facility, funded by the Wellington Pierce Foundation and staffed by volunteers from local universities. Victoria watched the presentation with tears in her eyes. Her daughter Caroline, now actively involved in the foundation's work, squeezed her mother's hand. "You know, Mom," she whispered, "great-grandmother would be proud. This is what the Wellington Pierce name was always meant to stand for." The evening's keynote speech was given jointly by Usha and Victoria, a symbolism not lost on anyone present. They spoke about the power of moving beyond superficial judgments to find common ground in service to others. Victoria, with remarkable candor, addressed her own journey. "A year ago, I made a mistake that could have ended in just another social scandal," she admitted to the packed conservatory. Instead, thanks to Mrs. Vance's grace and wisdom, it became the beginning of a journey toward understanding what true influence means. We're not just changing lives through education, we're changing the very way we think about privilege and responsibility. Usha followed with a vision for the future that drew on both innovation and tradition. "The strength of our community," she emphasized, "lies not in maintaining barriers, but in building bridges. Every child deserves the opportunity to dream big, and every one of us has a role to play in making those dreams possible." The impact of their words was evident in the conversations that followed. Old-guard families who had once measured their worth by their exclusivity were now competing to create the most effective community programs. Young socialites who had previously focused on fashion and parties were discussing social entrepreneurship and community development. Later in the evening, as the event wound down, a small group gathered in the Butterfly Garden, the same spot where Victoria had retreated in shame a year earlier. But now, the conversation was different. Community leaders, business executives, and social figures were engaged in genuine discussion about expanding the initiative's reach. "You know what the real change has been?" Margaret Whitmore observed, her years of social experience lending weight to her words. "We've stopped asking who belongs here and started asking, how can we help more people belong?" The statement captured the essence of the transformation that had taken place. The very notion of social status had evolved from being about exclusion to being about impact. The measure of influence was no longer who you could keep out, but how many lives you could touch. As the last guests departed, Usha and Victoria stood in the conservatory's main hall, surrounded by the evidence of what their unlikely partnership had achieved. The space that had once witnessed their confrontation now stood as a testament to the power of choosing growth over grievance, collaboration over conflict. Sometimes, Usha reflected, the most important lessons come from our most uncomfortable moments. Victoria nodded, adding, "And sometimes the people we try to exclude are exactly the ones we need to learn from." The story of that evening a year ago continued to be told in Columbus social circles, but not as a cautionary tale of social embarrassment. Instead, it had become a parable of transformation, a reminder that true class isn't about keeping others out, but about bringing them in. Have you witnessed a moment of conflict transform into an opportunity for growth? Share your stories of unexpected partnerships and positive change in the comments below. Sometimes the greatest achievements come from our willingness to look beyond first impressions and work together for something bigger than ourselves. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of grace, growth, and genuine connection. Let us know where you're watching from. This community grows stronger with every voice that joins it.